Minister, what has prevented you from fairly indexing military superannuation entitlements at the same percentage used for the age and service pensions? And will you reconsider your present position and fulfil the promise you made in opposition to index military superannuation pensions fairly to maintain their purchasing power?
David, thank you for the question, and I know it's of concern to a lot of people, and thank you too for your service. The military super system's different from, you know, the age pension or our sort of welfare entitlements.
Prime Minister, the men and women of the Australian Defence Force, both those now currently serving and those retired, understand only too well the difference between a welfare system and a superannuation system. Of course it's not a welfare system. It should be a lot better. But it's not, because you have failed us. The Australian government has failed both those in uniform and those now retired from uniform, because they've forgotten that back in 1976, when the Australian Parliament wrestled with how to implement the GES report, they agreed that they would use CPI, because CPI back in 1976 underpinned the wage arbitration process in this country. And that's why it was selected. So it would guarantee the members retaining purchasing power. And it worked for a decade, until in 86, and then in 89, and then in 91, 3 successive Labor governments fiddled with the CPI, and to the extent where it no longer can maintain purchasing power. And that's why eventually your government, admittedly, had to change the indexation for the age pensioners so that they could actually exist on their welfare scheme. In the last 20 years, those who have been retired since 1991 have lost 40% below where they should be, just to maintain their purchasing power as the government intended. No more motherhood, please, Prime Minister.
It's a super system that's different too from the sort of 9% now going to 12% that is compulsory for employees in different walks of life. You can have an employer contribution of up to 30%.
Smoke and mirrors here. 30% employer contribution rate. Really, Prime Minister, you're misleading the public, and you know it. The Commonwealth, under the old scheme and under the current scheme, does not contribute on a fortnightly regular basis into the superannuation for the troops. Does nothing. And what's more, 75% under the old scheme left the ADF before they even reached the 20 years of service where they could draw a pension. And what did the Commonwealth give back? Just to the cent what the troops contributed. No interest on that money. So in effect, the Commonwealth had an interest-free loan from the troops. And under the current scheme, under the MSBS scheme, the ones that the troops are now currently serving under, you still don't put any money in. You wait until the individual retires, and now you wait till they reach their preservation age. Then you'll start drawing on the consolidated revenue to pay it. And by then you'll have your future fund to do it. No, Prime Minister, come on. Start telling the truth, please.
And get their pension after 20 years of service, which is understandable, but that's quite different from Australians in other walks of life who can't access their pension until they're in older age ranges.
A pension after 20 years. Tell more, Prime Minister. Explain in your response that only applied to the old DFRDB scheme that ceased in 1991. The new MSBS scheme is a modern superannuation scheme, but you can't rewrite history. The DFRDB scheme that came in after GES in 1973, you had to serve for 20 years to be eligible. And why did GES come up with that? A, he was trying to improve retention in the ADF, and he was trying to encourage people to stay for 20 years. But in the back of his mind, he was very aware of the Vietnam War that was still running as he put pen to paper. The unique nature of military service means a lot. I know I don't have to remind you, because you unfortunately have to attend a lot of military funerals for the personnel dying in Afghanistan right now. That's the ultimate sacrifice. But there's a lot of other sacrifices that come with putting on the uniform in this nation. The troops don't complain. They accept their lot, but they expect their government to honour its side of the equation, and that's what's not happening. There is a huge cost on the family, on the individual, when you sign up to serve in the ADF. You've got to reward that service by honouring your obligations as an employer and not a legislator.
So, there is a question about how you best then index. We haven't used the same indexation measures as the age pension, which is a welfare benefit for people who really need to rely on that.
Let me see if I understand you here, Prime Minister. You're saying that welfare has to be indexed to maintain purchasing power. So therefore, you're not implying, you're saying that your superannuants from the Commonwealth Public Service and from the military don't have to maintain purchasing power. So you're prepared to give it to a welfare scheme to maintain purchasing power, but you are acknowledging that you are deliberately eroding the entitlements of those who have worked for the government. That's not what the Parliament voted for in 1976 when they agreed to align the welfare pensioner, the Commonwealth superannuant and the military superannuant by indexing to CPI so that they would maintain purchasing power.
We have had this looked at by committees, and it's been looked at and inquired into on a number of occasions, and it hasn't been the subject of a clear recommendation to government that it should be changed.
Prime Minister, I cannot believe you just said that. Go back and look at the Senate report from 2001 and 2002. Several of your current serving senators were on those two Senate reviews of superannuation. The clear recommendation from both 2001 and 2002 was that the indexation needed to be changed to maintain purchasing power. Go and look at Podger, 2007. He said the same thing for over 55s. The unfortunate thing about Podger, he ignored two critical components, and that is the reversionary pensioner, who could be younger than 55, and the invalidity pensioner. Leaving them both indexed at CPI without adjusting it, which is what his recommendation was, unfairly targets those who have already been treated unfairly. Look at your spouse entitlement for a reversionary pension from your scheme, Prime Minister. 83.5% of your salary would go to your spouse. For a public servant, it's 67.5%. And for a military wife, I'll say in this case, 62.5%. Why? Why is the service spouse worth so little compared to the superannuant spouse of a parliamentarian? The mind boggles, and I'm sure it does in the minds of all the public. And don't forget the Matthews report. You love quoting it. You, your Treasurer, your Finance Minister, they trot out Matthews' report every time they get a chance. Matthews said, use CPI because there's nothing better around. And then you came out with the PBLCI for the pensioners' beneficiary living cost index, and that's exactly what Matthews is referring to. If you develop something better that captures the cost for retirees, then use it. But no. You could prefer to use the dark arts and just manipulate a report to suit your own ends.
On the costs, you referred to the first year cost, but overall the cost is considerable. It's a more than $6 billion change.
Prime Minister, $6 billion for a scheme that even your own government actuary said is going to cost $19 million in the first year, and a bit over 100 for the 4 years. That's before you start applying some fictitious figures. and you come up with a figure of $6 billion. I don't believe it. Look at the age of the recipients of DFRDB. You've projected the cost out to 45 years. We're all dead. There won't be anyone to pay it to. Come on, Prime Minister. Please don't keep twisting the facts. Tell the public of Australia what you're doing, and that is you don't want your Commonwealth superannuants and your military superannuants to be treated fairly.
And so, of course, that's something that we have to weigh up compared with all of the other demands that there are for government resources, many of which those demands benefit people in the military too. They obviously want their kids to go to great schools. They want to know that if someone in their family got sick, the hospital in their community could help them out.
Oh, here we go, red herring time again. Oh, it's terribly expensive. We need the funds for somewhere else. We are not talking about retrospective legislation for something new here, a new demand. We're asking and seeking restoration of an entitlement that was promised us way back as far as 1976. You can go back further if you want to. You can go back to actually JES, because in 73, Prime Minister Whitlam said, I'm going to implement JES or improve on it. And don't say you can't afford it. We know, you know, the dark arts are being applied to your figures. How do you come up with an interest bill of $530 million in your first year of a scheme that only cost $20 million to implement? And you ignore the fact that sitting in your future fund right this very moment, there's $8.5 billion in cash. In cash. $20 million out of that is not going to bankrupt the future fund for its future use. And that's what it's there for, isn't it? To fund these so-called unfunded schemes. The only thing unfunded about our schemes is that the Commonwealth didn't fund their component. The troops did, but you conveniently forget about that. You took the money, you played around with it and used it to suit yourselves. And then you've got the audacity to say, oh, it's unfunded, so therefore we'll tax you for life, even though you're a superannuant and everyone else in this country gets it no tax after 60. Oh no, we'll tax you. Come on, Prime Minister, get real.
So I understand why you're so passionately pursuing this case. Not in a position to agree with you on it, but I hope you understand that we have thought about it, very, very seriously and tried to work our way through to what we think are fair arrangements, and that, I think, is keeping it in the form that it's been for a long period of time.
Misinformation, omissions, half-truths, the contempt for those who have served this nation was there for the nation to see. Yes, all politicians are wonderful at going to a battalion departure, a ship sailing, or a squadron leaving for overseas service. Sadly, they front those who don't come home and pay the ultimate sacrifice. But once they've taken off the uniform, they're out of mind and they don't matter. Well, Prime Minister, they do matter.